Hey guys, we're going to talk about news writing format in this particular video. And just like if you were writing an English paper or an essay, there's a format to that. You have 5 paragraphs, your intro, your 3 body paragraphs, and your conclusion. News writing also has a format that you need to follow to make it more cohesive, to make it more consistent with others' writing, and to better understand the writing as a whole, to make it more organized. I'm going to talk about 2 different types of structures and layouts. One is LQTQ and the second is an upside down pyramid. In my classes, teach my kids to use both of these in combination with each other to create the most organized, most structured news story that they can. It helps readability, and it also kind of gives you a formula. So when you go to write, you kind of know, okay, I need to start with this, and then I need to follow that up with this, and I need to make sure it ends like this. So let's talk about LQTQ format. And that's lead, quote, transition, quote. That's what it stands for. And honestly, you keep on going, transition, quote, transition, quote, transition, quote, until the story is done. So this transition quote part can go all the way out here. The first thing you need to think about with LQTQ is the beginning. So your story needs to begin with a lead. It's also spelled L-E-E-D if you ever see that anywhere. It still means a lead. And a lead is a brief summary of the main facts. So mainly who, what, when, where, why. And if you can get a how in there, go ahead and do that. This is just a summary. It's what is going on in a nutshell. Online readers are really short-sighted. They have a short attention span. If the important information is not at the top of the story, they will not read the rest of it. I promise. I see it every single day. So you definitely, with an online audience, want to get that lead in with all of the important information at the top. A lead can literally be 1 sentence, or it can be like 5 or 6 sentences. It can be a longer lead, or you can split it up into 2 paragraphs. It's up to you. But again, it's answering those 5 W's, who, what, when, where, and why. That is your first paragraph. In the next paragraph, you should include additional information that kind of builds on or elaborates on an important point from the lead. For example, if in the lead you mention that school nurses are on strike because they are being paid less. That's not true. It's just an example. But if that's what you were going to talk about, in that next paragraph, maybe you want to elaborate on which school nurses are protesting or are walking out. So we're talking about school nurses at Hazelwood East High School and Hazelwood Central High School specifically. You do want to add additional information without repeating yourself. You want to add new information. It's really important in journalism to not repeat yourself, to not be redundant, because again, with an online audience, they get bored of that so quickly. So make sure we're not repeating ourselves and we're always adding new or additional information. The next paragraph, or your next transition, it's also called, should be a quote from a relevant source. I left out the word source. That's directly related to the previous paragraph. You always want the quote and the previous paragraph to connect. That gives it a really good flow. So I'll go ahead and use my example again. We're talking about the school nurses walking out, and school nurses specifically from Hazelwood East High School and Hazelwood Central High School. So my quote, or my third transition or paragraph, should really be a quote from one of those nurses. That's what naturally makes sense. You should really get a quote from one of those nurses, maybe saying, "We chose to walk out today because blah, 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 blah." You want to get that quote in, okay? After that quote, you want to give some more information, some additional information, and maybe it's still elaborating on one of your 5 W's in your lead, but you do want to give more information. Continuing with that silly example that I'm giving, that's not true at all, maybe you want to say, administration in the district are pushing back against this walkout because they don't agree with the nurses' claims. Something of that but additional information. Then you would add a quote. Again, you repeat that pattern of additional information and related quotes until the story is told, until you get all of the information out that you have, okay, or that you need to get out. Until the story is done, you continue with that transition quote, okay? And your last quote should really wrap things up really well, or it should be a sentence that says, for more information, please visit this website or whatever. Number 2, I want to talk about an upside down pyramid. And this is a really simple concept that the title might not match up with how simple the concept is. It's literally where you put all of the important information at the top of your story. Put it first, and then other details should be included in descending order of importance. For example, again, with that lead, you want to get the most important, the who, what, when, where, why, out there at the top, because again, our readers have really short attention spans, and all the other information that's not as important needs to follow that, with the very least important information at the bottom. You're not trying to end it with a surprise or end it with a bang. You're not trying to do that in a journalistic straight news story. That's more for, like fiction writing, things like that. You want all of that important information at the very top, okay? And when you combine these two, what you get is your lead, that additional information that's really important, a quote that matches, another transition with additional information, but it's not as important as the stuff you've already said, again, until you get down to the very last bit of information, or where it's like tying up loose ends, essentially. But a combination of these two really gives a story good organization. Here's an example of LQTQ. I don't see you guys using the LQTQ format, which isn't necessarily bad at all. Generally, that upside down format, that upside down pyramid format, is the most important part. The LQTQ just gives you a much more structured way of doing it. So this is just something more recent. Charges filed in murder at Alton gas station after an investigation into the March 22nd shooting, blah, blah, blah. So you are giving the who, what, when, where, why of all of this. You're telling us mainly what happened. We need to know specifically what happened. That's what the reader wants to know. Ideally, the next paragraph, it would really benefit from a quote. Getting a quote from maybe an officer or a witness, which I know is difficult to do sometimes, but if you can talk to somebody, that quote really adds more, legitimacy to the story, adds more depth and human nature to the story. And honestly, sometimes it can be the most interesting part of a story, to really see what maybe this officer thinks about what's happening, or maybe what the witness saw versus what the report said. You never know what you're going to get. So ideally, you would get some additional information and a quote that goes along with that as well. And an example of inverted pyramid, it's not technically an example, it's just a diagram. So this is obviously where the inverted or upside down pyramid concept comes from, because it's literally an upside down pyramid. So the lead, the bulk of your story, the biggest part of your story needs to be at the top. Again, the who, what, when, where, why, how. Approximately 30 words, so 1 or 2 either transitions. You can literally do it in a sentence, though, I promise. And you can include a hook. I feel like y'all would be really good at that. My kids aren't quite there yet, so it can include a hook or something that really gets them interested in the story, right? That's what it's hooking them into it. And then the body, or all the middle stuff, is crucial information, but it's still not as important as what you told them up here, okay? So the arguments going on, the controversy, why it's important, evidence, background details, all this type of stuff. And then the last thing is, sometimes they call it the tail, but like the end of your story is just extra stuff. The reader doesn't necessarily have to know this information to understand the story, but it's just good to add. So maybe include extra content in blogs, columns, and other editorials. So again, those links to other pages are important. You guys can even link to your Instagram page, whatever it may be. So that is the inverted pyramid. And again, this is important stuff to know because using a consistent structure makes your news stories easier for your audience to read because they're going to know what to expect. So when they read, they're going to know, hey, there's going to be some quotes in here somewhere, and I know all the good stuff, the important information is at the top, and if I don't have time to read it, I can just read the top stuff and come back to it later. But they're going to start to know what to expect from each story as it comes. Writing stories is going to be easier and more organized. Again, it gives you a template almost. The LQTQ template we use in our classroom all the time. My kids, sometimes I let them lean on it too much. They don't know how to write without it. But you know that if you have a lead and some additional information, that you should follow that up with a quote and then some more additional information. And you also know, hey, this isn't necessarily super important to the story, so I can put it at the bottom. You know that stuff and you know where to put things. Obviously, and I've been saying this the whole time, other journalists use these structures. It's important to know that. Other journalists use these structures or a variation of these structures. And when they see that you guys also use it, not that I think your organization needs legitimization. I think it's a legitimate, news organization, everything. When you're talking to the bigwig journalists, this is the type of stuff they want to see and the type of language they want to hear. Just from, experience in the scholastic journalism field, I can tell you that that's important to them. But overall, knowing news structures is essentially how you pattern your stories. Just knowing generally more about how you're writing and what you're going to write is helpful. And in the next video, we're actually going to talk about Associated Press style, which is more, it's like grammar and syntax of journalism. It's kind of dry, but really good to know. So go ahead and click on that next video for that information.